Welcome, Mr. Barrett. Thank you so much for being on this episode. It's such a sheer honor for me to have you in this conversation.
I'm delighted.
Thank you so much. So let me start with your favorite question, Richard. What makes you happy?
What makes me happy? I tell you, what makes me happy is being the servant of my soul. And what does that mean? It means writing and teaching and creating. Above all, just expressing all of these creative thoughts that come through me and then putting them out into books and putting them out into e-learning. So sharing this information that comes through me with the world, that really makes me happy.
Mm-hmm. And it shows up in the number of books you have written. If my memory supports me, you have written 13 books, right?
Yes, so far 13 books, yes. And I've been writing a book every year for the last 8 or 9 years. And then all of a sudden, my soul said to me, yeah, just pause for a moment and let's consolidate everything that you've written into a series of e-learning courses. And so that's what I've been working on for the last 6 months.
Richard, I'm just wondering, writing 13 books, one book on every year basis, from where do you get that much of inspiration and how do you keep that fire burning and alive?
The answer is I have no idea. It is basically, I'm living the life of my soul. I wake up at 4, like this morning, I woke up at 4:30. I feel really inspired. I come and I write and I get amazing ideas and I just follow, in fact, what I'm being told. And follow the thoughts that are coming to me. Now, it's not, I don't create those thoughts. The thoughts come. And so I just follow those thoughts. And I've been doing that for 15 years now, just bringing down these ideas from a higher source, which I call my soul, and then putting them out into the world in written documents. And so it's an amazing thing. I'm in awe, actually. I just think, wow, I don't know how I can't stop it. I mean, I was speaking to somebody the other day on a podcast about creative writing, and they said, what happens? How do you get over it when, your inspiration dries up? I said, I have no idea. It's never dried up.
Because, what you said, something really beautiful. It just flows through you.
Yeah.
Tell me that.
Flows through me.
How does that feel? How does that feel in your body? What kind of thoughts are there, if any?
When I'm finished doing a piece of writing or I've got an idea and I've explored it logically, I sit there looking at it in amazement and I go, wow, that is so interesting. And it's as if I'm detached. There's a part of me that is like looking at whatever I've created, and there's a part of me that is creating it. And while I'm creating it, the part that is looking is no longer there. The part is just, I'm in full flow of creation. And then when I finish, this other part of me can read it or listen to a podcast or whatever that I did or a video and go, wow, that was really interesting. I can't explain it.
It's so beautiful because I've heard this, that, when you become the creator, you become the creation. That's where the universe flows through you. So possibly that's what I could relate with. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
The kind of contribution that you have done in the space of values, in the space of culture, in the space of leadership development worldwide, people really look up to you. So let me ask you a very basic question. I'm sure thousands of people would have asked this question. What are values? So let me just hear it from the masters and let me just get that direct wisdom.
Okay, well, I used to call values a shorthand way of expressing what's important, but then I came to realize actually they are the energetic drivers of our aspirations and intentions. They're energetic drivers. So I say energetic because they link to the energy field of the body, the energy field of the soul. And when you are living in alignment with your values, you feel good. When you are not living in alignment with your values, you don't feel good. And so they are really a care at the energetic level, because you can say when you are an authentic human being, you feel good inside. When you are not authentic, when you tell lies or you blame others or whatever, it doesn't feel good. And in fact, energetically, it's not good for your body. So staying in alignment with who you truly are, your deeply held values, your soul values, is fundamentally important for your physical and mental health.
And I've also heard people saying that anything that you do or anything that you avoid is driven by your values. And also, while doing research on what are the possible questions that I may want to ask you, I came across something called positive values and something called potentially limiting values.
Yeah, this is something I invented 25 years ago. I realized that there are positive values. I'll name just a few: commitment, honesty, transparency, creativity, friendship, love, etc. But then there are other, and there are certain behaviors that go with those. Now, there are other behaviors which are driven by a different part of our psychic entity, the fears of the ego, which cause us to do things like blame, internal competition in an organization, jealousy. I call these values because at some level, they are valuable to a part of our psychic entity. Otherwise, we wouldn't behave in accordance with those values. So I call them potentially limiting values. Now, some potentially limiting values are always potentially limiting. So, for example, blame is almost always potentially limiting, because when you do that, when you behave in that way, use that value, it creates separation. And separation means that you're not going to get along with people so well. Now, bureaucracy is a potentially limiting value we have in organizations, which up to a point is absolutely necessary. If you have running an organization, you need a little bit of order and systems, we call it bureaucracy, in order to manage the company well. But when you have too much, it's disastrous for the company because it stifles employee engagement. So that's why I call these limiting values potentially limiting. And we don't know exactly how limiting they are until we realize that we're actually operating with these limiting values, and we take a good solid look at ourselves and go, wow, yeah, that really is potentially limiting. Or I could actually decrease the amount of bureaucracy and it would still be okay. What bureaucracy does is basically tells people we don't trust you. And so we don't want that in an organization. We want to trust our leaders, and we want our leaders to trust us. So we don't want heavy-handed bureaucracy because we want to be trusted. And so, so we're a light touch. Anyhow, that's a brief explanation of potentially limiting values in our personal life and in our organizational life.
I'm just wondering, how would you differentiate? So let's say there are 5 people in an organization, and somebody's living from a space of honesty, somebody's living from a space of compassion, prosperity, wellness. At the same time, somebody's living from a space of, let's say, power or bureaucracy. How would we create a distinction? How does that show up in your behavior?
Well, first of all, let's consider these 2 people as part of the same team. They won't get along very well together because the person with power will be continually trying to outdo the other person. And the other person, even though they've got it all together, they won't like that. Now let's consider another where the person with power is the leader. Mm-hmm. Well, what's going to happen there is that person who is the other person is not going to stay very long, because the leader creates the culture of the organization. And if you are living from honesty and transparency and all of these good things, working for a boss who has constantly got all these fear-based beliefs about not being good enough, so he needs power to prove that he is strong, you're going to get out of there unless you're absolutely dependent on that job and there's no other job, and then you have to stick it out. But other than that, you're gonna after a little while, you're going to leave, because you can't live in the same frequency of vibration, let me put it that way, because the negativity of the power and the fear is a lower frequency vibration of energy than a vibration of love and honesty and transparency.
So would it be fair for me to say that, these potentially limiting values, they are driven by some kind of fear, some
Yeah,
kind of insecurity?
absolutely. They're potentially driven by fear-based beliefs. And there are basically three types of fear-based beliefs. I don't have enough, I'm not loved enough, and I'm not enough. So survival, safety, and security. Emotional security. And so if during the early stages of your life, to the age of 24, you're growing and developing, you learn because of your experiences that you don't have enough, it's difficult to survive, or you're not loved or feel loved enough, or you don't feel you are enough. These fear-based beliefs get imprinted into our minds because our minds are growing and developing through those up to the age of about 24. And they actually become problems for us in our adult life. And, if we want to get past them and continue to grow and develop, we have to release those fears, because that fear-based energy blocks our future growth.
And this is actually what we call as the initial stage of an individual, what we call as the ego development stage, right?
Yeah, that's the ego development stage where it's normal. I've never met a human being on the planet who doesn't have some fear-based beliefs around what I call level 1, 2, and 3.
Richard, I would love to get into that conversation, because it would be really unfortunate at my part if I don't learn the 7 stages of human development, or the personal development, or the psychological development from you. Before we get there, I've heard you saying that we are souls having a human experience. Would love to hear your views on that. What do you mean by we are souls having a human experience?
I often do this, and I'm going to do it with you right now, okay? I've been doing it for 4 years. Whenever I do a webinar or a seminar or a workshop, I say to people, I want you to stand up if this statement is true for you. I'm not going to ask you to stand up, but you can raise your hand, okay? All right, so if this is true, raise your hand so I can see it, okay? I have a car, all right? I am a car.
I am a car.
I have a television. I am a television. I have a soul.
Yes.
I am a soul. You can raise your hand if you want.
And that is where I'm in my body, I'm experiencing there's some kind of challenge going on. There's some kind of push going on. A part of me.
It's called cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Because it's 2 separate ideas. And if you ascribe to one idea, then it negates the other idea. When I do this in audiences, and I ask them to stand up, they stand up when I say I have a soul. And then I say sit down, and I will say I am a soul. And they stand up again. Always. And it's like, okay, so you know whether you are a television or you have a television, but you don't know whether you are a soul or you have a soul. Right? Now, the answer to that question for me is very simple. It is, I am a soul. I don't have a soul. I start from the point, I have a soul, and then I learn through the 5 steps of soul activation that I actually am a soul. And that when I surrender whatever that little ego to my soul and give my life over to my soul, the soul takes care of me. I get to the point where everything I need shows up in my life because my soul organizes it in what I call the 4th dimensional energetic field. So it shows up through synchronicity. I'm sure you've had synchronicity in your life.
Yeah.
And so what is synchronicity? It's Carl Jung defined it as unconnected events with a common meaning.
Yeah.
And you give it that common meaning. But actually, it's not that mystical, because at the energetic level, it's basically the soul organizing your life. And if you pay attention to synchronicity, you will be guided. And it's an amazing thing. So how do we get in touch with our souls? Well, that's a whole 4-day program that I do. But it's also a part of my new e-learning course, 5 Steps of Soul Activation. But basically, we get in touch with our soul every day through our feelings. Because you see, our feelings come from our emotion. And our emotion is energy in motion. And so when we're in living in alignment with our soul, we feel joy. That's an emotion. And then we feel good. Okay. Now, when we are out of alignment, and when I think I have needs, and those needs are not met, then I get angry. That's why we get angry, because our needs are not met. And the moment I get angry, that's an emotion, then I have a feeling. Oh, nobody cares about me, or whatever. So the feelings you translate the emotion into feelings through your particular belief. So you can I have the same emotion, but we have very different feelings because of the belief that we put onto whatever's happening. So there are only basic 6 emotions, at least in my method, and there are many feelings because it depends on your translation of the emotion, and that depends on your history, personal history, and particularly the history of your childhood. So this creates this energy shift, like the energy of fear. I'm not getting my needs met. I get angry, negative energy, which separates us from our soul. So if you're holding on to any fear-based beliefs of low frequency vibration, then you won't be able to embrace the higher frequency vibrations of love, which come from the soul. And there will be a separation between your ego and your soul.
God. Now, help me understand. You mentioned that we are souls having a human experience.
Right.
And at the same time, I've also heard about the ego part that we've been talking about. So how does this dynamic of ego and soul...
How does all that fit together? All right. Okay. So look, when you die, you don't lose consciousness.
Yeah.
You lose awareness of this particular 3-dimensional physical existence, which is an amazing illusion. And we just move back to 4th dimensional energetic awareness, where our soul is all of the time. So you and I are connected at that level because we're all individuated aspects of the universal energy field. So things that draw us together happen in this energetic field of the 4th dimension. Our souls connect, and we don't even know that's happened. So, all right. So the souls are in this energetic world, and they want to experience, they want to grow and develop. And in that field of love, it's really hard to grow and develop. So they come down into this 3-dimensional physical world where we have this thing called fear. And fear is a different frequency vibration. And so souls come into this world from this love field, and they come into the fetus, into the embryo, and then into the fetus. And when that baby feels, up to about 18 months, the baby begins to feel, it's living in soul consciousness, but it's beginning to have a body-mind that needs to find stability. And that body-mind, when it doesn't find stability, like the mother is drinking alcohol or the mother is sick or whatever, the fetus actually feels it. And the baby will also feel it. So the baby begins to recognize, or the little soul in the baby, that it's actually in a world of separation. And it's painful.
So is this stage 2 or stage 1?
Well, it's stage 1. The soul is dominant for the first 3 months of gestation.
Okay.
Then the body-mind forms.
Got it.
And the soul becomes the subconscious of the body-mind. And the body-mind then feels instability when it's not able to maintain homeostasis. And the fears of the body-mind get repressed to the soul-mind. Now, the soul-mind begins to feel this sense of separation. And it's painful for the soul, because it's used to living in this world of connection. And so it creates a psychic entity we call the ego at about 18 months of age. And that psychic entity acts as a buffer between this 3-dimensional physical world and the world of the soul, the energetic world of the soul. And so now the ego takes over, and he doesn't know that it's the creation of the soul.
Yeah. Now, so when the ego is formed, it's primarily used the word it's a buffer. So that means it's in order to take care of the soul, right?
Yeah, it's actually to protect the soul. The soul created the ego to protect the soul from this vibrational frequency of separation and fear, because it's very hard for the soul to live in that vibration.
Yeah.
So the ego takes its job very seriously. It doesn't know that that's what it's supposed to be doing. It just knows that it has to protect its survival, its safety, and its security. It just knows that. And so I ask people, well, where does the will to live come from? Because, we all have this, all creatures have this survival instinct. Well, the will to survive is basically the soul's will to be present in three-dimensional materiality. It's a will to be present in this, and the ego translates that into survival. I've got to survive. I've got to feel safe. I've got to feel secure. And these are the first three stages of development. Now, it's interesting that the soul is able to do that, but the ego is also able to do that, because if during this age, right, roughly from a 2 to 8, when the emotional mind is dominant, and let's say the child is abused frequently, 18 months or 2 years to around 7 or 8, the emotional mind becomes dominant, the body mind becomes the subconscious. If that child is abused, let's say sexually abused or continually, it becomes very painful for the ego. So now the ego does what the soul did. It creates an alter ego to protect itself. So whenever this situation arrives, an alter ego will pop up to protect the ego. So this is a psychological template that the soul uses to protect itself, and then the ego uses to protect itself.
We've got soul here, then we've got ego to take care of that soul, and then we've got alter ego to take care of that as well.
Yeah, but most people don't have too many alter ego. You have to be seriously abused and traumatized in order to develop. However, there's something very interesting about alter egos. You can look this up on YouTube. It's absolutely fascinating. When an alter ego is present, it changes the whole physiology of the body. So when an alter ego is present, you can be suffering from a particular disease. So when the alter ego is present and you visit the doctor and you have tests, he says, you've got diabetes. When the alter ego is not present, you don't have diabetes. So the mind absolutely controls the physical body. So this is absolutely fascinating.
Yeah. So your experiences that you've gone through in your life has a direct impact on the feeling that you would experience in the moment, and that would have a direct impact on your somatics, your body experience.
So we were talking about, how do you connect with the soul? And, one of the ways to find out, how much you're in alignment is through your feelings. So if you frequently get angry and you frequently get sad, then, there's obviously something not aligned. I say sadness is really, or depression is really sadness of the soul, because the soul incarnates to do three things: to self-express, connect, and contribute. Now, if the ego, because of its beliefs, prevents the soul from self-expressing, connecting, and contributing, the soul gets sad. And that sadness is felt as depression. So depression is basically the sadness of the soul, because you're not living in alignment with the soul energy. So it all links together beautifully, I think. When we understand the ego-soul dynamic, we can figure out. I remember 10 years or more ago now, I went through a difficult period and I got depressed, and I knew what was happening. And so when I woke up in the morning feeling awful, I just closed my eyes and I said to my soul, bring it on, bring it on, bring on that pain, bring it on. Because I knew the only way through it is to walk into it. You can't, taking pills doesn't solve it. You've got to move through it, because you've got to let go of those fears that are blocking your progress. And, in a few months, I felt totally better. Being aware of the ego-soul dynamic is really fundamentally important. And I write about that in my book, The New Psychology of Human Well-Being.
And they say the moment you've been able to acknowledge and name an emotion, it serves you and it moves out of your body.
Well, it doesn't exactly move like that. but it's very difficult to master an emotion. But what you can do is you can recognize it when it comes up, and instead of taking 2 days to get over it, you can get over it in a minute or 5 minutes. But those beliefs that are really deeply embedded, they're still going to trigger you, but you can manage it.
Yeah, you can be aware of in the moment.
You can be aware of it and say, I see what's happening to myself. You like move from the dance floor into the balcony, and you look down on yourself and say, oh, look, Richard, you're experiencing X, Y, Z. You're angry, you're upset. What is the fear that is going on with you that is causing you to do that? Well, and then you're able to separate yourself from it.
And so this is where we already have developed our limbic brain, right? What's the next?
So by the age of 8, you've got you've been developing the limbic brain, or the emotional mind, and then in the background, the neocortex, the rational mind, has been developing, and then it becomes dominant around the age of 8, and keeps on growing and developing. The brain and the rational mind keep on growing and developing until around the age of 22. So we don't have a fully functioning brain or mind until we get to our early 20s. And this is why teenagers do really stupid things, because they don't have a fully rational mind. I did stupid things when I was a teenager, fortunately not too bad, but so we get to the age of 22, and we've been through these first 3 stages of biological development, but also psychological development. And the psychological development is linked to the biological development of, first of all, the soul mind, then the reptilian mind brain, the body mind, then the limbic mind brain, the emotional mind, and then the neocortex, the rational mind. And any of the since during that period, these minds and the brains were growing and developing, anything you learn becomes embedded quite deeply. And so we spend the rest of our lives then trying to give up these limiting beliefs, these potentially limiting values, which show up as potentially limiting values, so that we can get back into alignment with our soul. So we spend the half of our lives letting go of those fears so that we can move back into soul consciousness. Well, that's the theory. Yeah. Most people on the planet never manage it.
Yeah. So these 3 stages are what we call as the ego development stage, right?
Yeah.
And okay, so let me just bring a little bit of humor, and to a large extent it is true as well. So I still do stupid things. Does that mean that I've not been able to develop my neocortex brain?
Oh, tell me one of the stupid things that you do.
Oh, several stupid things. Getting into unnecessarily biases, getting hooked with some emotional challenges, or...
Yeah. Well, it means that you somehow, you have, you're blocked in a way. So you have some limiting beliefs, fear-based beliefs that you learned in childhood that you're still practicing as an adult, and they're causing you pain. Now, emotional pain. So pain is an amazing thing. It's really positive because it's pointing exactly at what you need to fix. I mean, in the body, when you've got pain in your elbow, you have to fix your elbow. In the emotional mind, when you have pain, it's around a particular set of events. And you know that if you dig into those events and examine your beliefs, that's what you have to fix. So pain is positive. It really helps you grow and develop. Pain should not be avoided. As I said, when I got depressed, I walked into that pain because I knew I had to get through it. And that's the only way you can deal with it. So if you feel emotional pain, it's telling you that you've got something to work on.
So now let me just bring a real example here, and then would love to get into the second stage, what we call as the individuating, and then the soul activation, right? We will get there. But before that, I've got one question, Richard. So there is a tendency, and I'll share with you a few tendencies in my life. There's a tendency for me to achieve more, or go for one accomplishments over the other, and then the next one. Or there's a deeper tendency in me to start comparing myself with others and start feeling bad or sad about myself.
Okay, these are typical. Are you, let me ask you your age. Are you below the age of 40?
Yes, I'm touching the age of 40.
Okay, so you're roughly from the early 20s to the late 30s, you're in the individuating stage.
Mm-hmm.
And this stage, the needs of that stage are, first of all, to have freedom, to explore who you are, to try different things, and to find out what you're good at, but also to let go of the fears that you learned in your childhood. Now, these two fears about not being good enough, basically, I mean, this is what you're into, an achievement. You need to prove to somebody that you are good enough. That comes from your teenage years.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, during that period, you were not praised enough. You did not get, you didn't get your recognition needs met. So as a teenager, we need to be recognized by others and feel good about ourselves. If you don't get those needs met, they will continue. And you will keep on going, trying to get your needs met. Now, if you look at Donald Trump, it's exactly that. I mean, he never individuated. He never got past that stage. So you have to know that this focus on achievement is really, I mean, achievement is good and it's normal at that stage. But when it becomes all-encompassing and all-controlling over everything you do, then you've got an issue. And it's because you've got a fear-based belief going back to your teenage years that you need to master. And that's basically what it is. Now, comparing is also, comes from the same area. It's like, I'm not good enough, so, I'm always trying to be better than anybody else, but I know. And so it's all about recognition and the fact that you didn't get enough recognition when you were a teenager. And so you have to now master. This is the individuating stage. This is when you have to master that. Otherwise, it's going to hold you back in the future.
So would it be fair for me to say that there are certain behaviors which would be visible that would get manifested in the external world, would be like somebody who's very driven, somebody who's striving for perfection, somebody who is very ambitious, somebody who's very autocratic or arrogant. So these are the behaviors.
Yeah, they all come from a lack of recognition during the teenage years, basically. And once you know that, then you think, oh, okay, well, I'm no longer a teenager. I can let that go now. I mean, I learned that because I had to survive in some way, and I didn't get my needs met. So, stop it. Realize where it's coming from and say, I am good enough. I've proved I'm good enough. I don't need to go on proving to my parents and proving to my teachers that I'm good enough. I know I'm good enough because look what's happened to me. Look what I've done.
Yeah. Interestingly, Richard, what I've realized is, so I've been interviewing people, I've been interviewing leaders, thought leaders, entrepreneurs for several years now. What I've realized is at the end of the conversation, 8 out of 10 people ask me, Gaurav, how was the conversation? Was I fine?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'm not going to ask you, don't worry, because I don't care. Yeah, that's exactly right. They do. They say, was that okay?
External validation, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well done. You've spotted it. That's exactly right. So these are people who don't have a well-developed sense of self-esteem. And they care about what you think. Yeah. Well, I don't care about what you think, frankly.
And I will come to this point in a while.
I don't care to the point. I mean, I care about what you think, but I don't want to. I'm not going to give my power away to you by caring enough about what you think. Because when I care about what you think, I give my power away. I become dependent on you for my self-worth.
Yeah.
God, why would I want to give away my power?
Let me bring another scenario. And again, whatever I'm listening, I could sense that again, it would be coming from the ego development stage. And then you use the word called individuating, and we'll get into that space, right? Now, I come across people where their self-worth is dependent on how much they are liked by other people or what kind of validation that they're getting from other people, right?
Okay, so how much you're liked.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, that comes from the second stage of development. Remember I said, third stage is teenagers, and that's all about the differentiating stage, and it's the development neocortex, and it's about being recognized.
Yeah.
Well, being loved comes through the second stage of development, the emotional mind, from 2 to 8, where we need to feel loved in order to feel safe. And so when people have this need to be liked, it's because they didn't get enough love during that period of their lives. So I want you to like me because I don't feel loved enough.
You got it.
And they don't feel loved enough because when they were between the age of 2 and 8, they weren't loved enough. and they're still trying to find that love. So they try and find it by wanting to be liked. Now, again, we give our power away when we want to be liked. Let's say you've got an employee, or you are an employee and you have a boss and you want your boss to like you. You're not going to be honest with your boss.
Yeah.
You're going to tell your boss exactly what he wants to hear. Now, if your boss is self-actualized, he'll get rid of you right away because he'll see what's going on.
Yeah. Or there would be always a need for a sense of belongingness with a particular sect or a particular community. And I think that's where it becomes extremely challenging for me, if I'm operating from that space, to challenge people and get the work done. And so that means the courageous authenticity is not available to me, right?
You need to have the courage to face your fear about being liked. It means having courageous conversations. Now, this is particularly difficult for women because they've grown, for the last 4 millennia, women have grown up in a patriarchal world. And so for them to have courageous conversations is a lot harder than for men. But still, men have a problem with it too, particularly if you weren't loved enough when you were a young child.
Makes sense. Makes so much sense.
Yeah, there's a video on my website called The Evolutionary Woman, where I spend an hour talking about this topic. Courageous conversations.
Thank you so much, Richard, for sharing that. So let's get into the word that you spoke about, individuating, right? And you said this is the 4th stage of human development.
Yeah. So individuating is about finding the freedom to be who you are, because you've grown up in your parental world, you've grown up in your cultural world, and now you've probably got some freedom, you've left home, you've got a job, and you say, wait a minute, I don't actually agree with my parents, or I don't actually agree with my culture, so who am I? So that's when we begin to shift from belief-based decision-making into values-based decision-making, because we realize we were indoctrinated with all of these beliefs. And now we want to find out who we are. And so we need freedom to do that. And when we work on ourselves, then we begin to realize that we have different values to our parents. We have different values to the culture in which we were raised, and we want to know what those are. And that's the individuating stage, which you've been going through for the past 15 years. And then you get to the next stage, which will be self-actualization. So individuating is very difficult. In fact, probably 90% of the people on the planet never get to that stage because they live in conditions where they're completely focused on survival. They don't have the liberty to feel free because they're constantly, every day, faced with survival situations. So they don't, or they had such a difficult childhood that they've got these limiting beliefs about not having enough, not being loved enough, and not being enough that keep them anchored in those lower levels of consciousness.
Richard, help me understand. You said there are very few people who actually transcend into this space of individuating, right? Wondering, before this stage, you are living from a space of that I'm not good enough, I'm not loved enough, I am not enough, right?
You might be. You might have some of those. But basically, you're also living in a world where you find it difficult to survive. Yes. So you've got your fear-based beliefs from your childhood, but you also got the practical considerations, like I find it hard to find a job to earn enough money to pay for my family. Okay, so I'm constantly focused on survival, and that stops me from individuating. Or you live in an authoritarian regime, like the former USSR or North Korea, where people who wanted to free think, individuate, were locked up in the Gulag archipelago for 20 years. And it still happens in Russia, and in many of these nations, if you want the freedom to be who you are, which means to recognize your sexual identity, like I'm gay, or I'm a lesbian, or I'm transgender. Wow, that it goes against everything, and you can't be open about it because you'll go and finish up in jail. You may even lose your life. So in authoritarian regimes, you can't individuate. So, most of the countries in the world are run by authoritarian governments. So again, I come back to the point that not that many people can individuate. And my whole point is, if we're going to build a better world, we have to create the conditions where people can individuate.
Yeah.
And being individuate means one thing. It means becoming conscious. And what does becoming conscious mean? It means three things. One, I become aware of my impact of my behaviors. Secondly, I become aware of my thoughts on my physical and mental health. And three, I care about the impact that I have. Now, if you don't care about the impact, well, you'll never become conscious. But if you have those three things in place, then you can become, and that's what the individuating stage is about becoming conscious.
In fact, Richard, that's what my question is. Now, when one is not being able to traverse from the ego development stage and get into individuating, and then the third one that you spoke about, the soul activation stage, I'm assuming there's so much of suppressed emotions, right? What is the impact of that on a human body, on health, the vehicle what we speak about?
Can be devastating. Because any fears that you're holding on to in your mind affect your body. And so what we see is, from about early 40s onwards, we also see all sorts of diseases beginning to increase significantly. And even suicide increases significantly from around late teenage years and reaches a peak in the 40s and early 50s. So all of those problems and fears that we learned in childhood, actually, the fears, the energetic vibration stays in our body and eventually shows up as disease.
Got it. I'm sure.
Yeah, and so that's why an individuating stage is so important, because that's when we have to try and release those fears. Now, so when you get to the first stage of soul activation, which is self-expression, which is in your 40s, what comes up for you are all of the fears that you had at the survival level. Let me give you an example. When I was 45, I was working at the World Bank. I had a really good job. I was a transportation engineer, and I suddenly got bored. Now, I realized that actually I hadn't quite heard my soul correctly. I thought when I was 17, I thought I had transportation, but actually it was transformation. And then I realized I had to change my job and my life. And so I left the World Bank to go out into the world to do work that I had no experience in. I wasn't known, and all my friends said I was absolutely crazy giving up a 6-figure tax-free salary in order to do something that I wasn't known. But I couldn't. It was the calling of my soul. So the fears of the first stage of development show up in the 5th stage. Now, the fears of the second stage of development, which is about relationships, show up in the 6th stage, which is the integrating stage, when we're in our 50s, when we want to connect. So self-expression in the 40s, connection to make a difference in the 50s. If we can't connect because we learn fear-based beliefs about relationships when we were 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, we won't be able to complete that stage. And then in the last stage is the serving stage above 60. If we learned in the 3rd stage, the differentiating stage when we were teenagers, that we weren't good enough, then we didn't have enough confidence to go out into the world. So when we get to the serving stage, we can't contribute because we're afraid to go out in the world and contribute. So all of these first 3 stages are linked to the last 3 stages of soul activation.
So when you're saying that the first 3 stages are directly linked with the last 3 stages, would it be fair for me to say that all the triggers that we experience in the last 3 stages, right?
Yeah.
Is primarily the
I know what you're going to say. They're all linked back to the early stages. Absolutely. Yeah. That's why you have to go back, and when you experience a blockage in your life, you have to say, well, what's the fear? Link it back to the first 3 stages. Realize that you are that way because you had to survive during those 3 stages, but understand that you're not a child anymore. You don't need your parents to praise you anymore. Okay?
So understand, how can one master the fears or the fear-based beliefs developed in the initial first stages of an individual?
First thing you have to do is name them. You have to identify them. Now, most people, there are subconscious fears, so we don't know what they are. We just don't feel very good. We do stupid things, behaviors based on these fears. So the first thing is to become conscious and say, well, okay, I have an 8-step process for this in my book, What My Soul Told Me. It's also in some of my other books. But basically, what we're doing is we're saying, oh, Richard, I notice you're getting upset. What is the fear that is making you upset? So we begin an inquiry, and then we go, well, what is the emotion? Can I release that emotion? And then what is the feeling? And what is the thought? And once we get to emotion, feeling, thought, now once we got the thought, then we know that, oh, I'm not good enough. Now we know how to handle it. But unless you do that inquiry, you'll just have to live with it. And then once you've got the thought, you get, well, how can I overcome that thought? And then you start to work on yourself and say, well, okay, so this thought actually is a bit irrational now, because I've proved to myself in the last 20 years that I am good enough. So let me develop an affirmation that says I'm really good enough to do anything. And so now you have to build a counter thought. So you have to rewire your brain, your synapses. Mm-hmm. And when you rewire your synapses, you're actually creating a new belief. And so it takes time to do that. But eventually, you'll be able to master. Now, it may take several years, and it may mean that you actually are always triggered by that thought. But actually, instead of taking 2 or 3 days to get over it, being upset for 2 or 3 days, we only have to be upset for 5 minutes because we know what is going on.
Richard, thank you for triggering this thought in me. And I'm just wondering, and talking about looking at all the 7 stages that we spoke about. And you also spoke about that there could be a possibility that most of us, we have not been able to move from individuating to the later 3 stages, right? Is it also possible, on the other hand, that somebody can skip these stages and move from 1, 2, 3 to level 5 and 6?
Millennials who are at the individuating stage think, oh, I'm making a difference in the world, exactly, and therefore I must be at the integrating stage in the 50s. Absolutely. Yeah, well, you see, the point is where is the drive for making a difference coming from? Well, the drive for making a difference, in your case, is coming from achievement. You're at the individuating stage, you want to make a difference. The drive is achievement. Okay, at the integrating stage in your 50s, the drive for making a difference comes from a different place. It comes from empathy. So if you have to go through the seasons of your life. So you want to make a difference when you're in your 20s and 30s, but recognize that you're righting a wrong, you're dealing with injustice, you're focusing on achievement, but you're not coming from a deep place of empathy. And that's the integrating stage. It's the connecting stage. Now, interestingly, it's linked to the second stage, which is relationships. Now, if you were a boy at that stage and you were told, be strong, don't show your feelings, when you get to your 50s and you want to connect and make a difference, you don't have the capacities because you're not in touch with your feelings. And there's a link between that and prostate cancer, because prostate cancer takes off towards the end of the 50s because you are not connecting. And it's the second chakra, which is linked to the 6th chakra. The second chakra is where the prostate is. You see? And with women, self-expression is the important thing in the 40s, because women in their 40s have usually a husband who has needs, children who have needs, and aging parents who have needs. And who comes last? Well, they put themselves last. So they're able to fully self-express. And so that's the 5th chakra, the throat chakra, and the upper chest, and they get breast cancer.
Got it. So also, Richard, if you can help us understand, you spoke about that there are different phases, or there are different ways to activate your soul.
Yeah, 5 stages.
If you just spend 5 minutes on that, would love to hear from you.
Okay, so the first stage is becoming aware of that you have a soul. The first stage, you become aware that you have one. Then you think, oh, okay, so now I want to work towards becoming one with my soul and recognizing that I am a soul. That's the journey. So the first thing is becoming aware of your soul. The second thing is connecting with your soul. The next stage is befriending your soul. Then comes the most difficult stage, which is trusting your soul to meet all your needs. And the last stage is actually becoming one with your soul. Now, all of that's in my book, What My Soul Told Me, and it's in my e-learning course called 5 Steps to Soul Activation. Now, to go into all of those stages right here and now is going to take another hour. So I don't think we have time to do that. Maybe we can pick that up at some other time. But these are the stages. So first, becoming aware. That usually happens at the individuating stage. And then you connect with your soul and you begin to realize, oh, my feelings are a connection. And you could actually talk to your soul and have a conversation. I teach how to do that. Then comes the next stage, which is befriending your soul. So you realize that your soul has desires, self-expression, connection, contribution. And so as a friend, you're going to help your soul to do that. So you put your ego aside and then you get to the point of trusting your soul, which is to say, well, if I am a soul, I can relax. Because I don't have, and all my needs will be met by my soul. Now, it takes 4 or 5 years to move through that. At least it did for me, that trusting stage. And then gradually you get, oh my God, I write all my books are downloads from my soul, I don't have to worry. I go into a conversation with you like now. I don't prepare because I know I'm just going to soul speak. And so once I've got through that phase, then I can finally say, look, I'm one with my soul. In fact, there's no more me left. There's no ego me. I occasionally gets triggered now and again, but not that often. And it means you don't have worries. Okay, you're happy. You have joy. I'm going through this coronavirus thing, and I'm thinking, so what? If I die, I'm just going to become aware of the love field where I will go. It's okay, fine, I'm happy. In fact, when this happened, I said to myself, what's the opportunity? Whenever you get a situation which seems to be impeding you, you have to say, what's the opportunity? Not what's the problem. Because wherever you put your mind energy is where you go. Yeah. So if you say, well, I've got a problem. You say, no, what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity? Translate the problem into an opportunity. Say, oh, I've suddenly got blocked from this path. I got fired. What's the opportunity? You see, if you think about problem, you become a victim all the time. If you think about opportunity, you take possession of yourself. You're no longer a victim.
It's all about taking responsibility and moving away from the mindset of being a victim.
You become responsible and accountable for your life. You're no longer a victim. Most people are victims.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Richard. Richard, also during the conversation, and also I've heard you saying that you don't have needs. What does that mean when you're saying, I don't have needs?
Well, I have requirements. Okay, you have requirements, I have requirements. I need oxygen. Unless I'm up above 3,000 feet, and then I'm usually get my requirements of oxygen met as long as I'm below 3,000 feet. So I need oxygen, I need food. Okay, well, I have enough food. I need love, I've got love. So these are requirements. So a need is something that you think that you want, because if you have it, you will be happier. Now, right there is fear. Like, my life isn't perfect, because I need this. Okay, as soon as you open yourself up to having needs, you open yourself up to fear, and you become part of the problem, your own problem. And so it's like training your mind to think in a different way. And then once you realize you are a soul, and your soul can actually take care of all of your needs without even you knowing about it, then you can relax. Now, you don't get there overnight. It requires a lot of mind training to get there. But once you get there, you can say, I have requirements because I've got to keep my body alive, but I don't have needs, because as soon as I get into need and I don't get a need met, I get angry, I get upset, I get irritated, I get into rage, and then I've lost it. I'm into fear and I've lost my soul.
Thank you.
So the way past that is to have an attitude of gratitude.
Mm.
In other words, be thankful for anything you have, everything you have. Just be happy with what you've got.
Yeah.
I mean, at this moment in time, just think at this moment in time, do you have everything you need? Of course you do.
Yes.
I mean, if you can live in the present moment, you can live without needs because you're living in the present moment. You're alive. You're breathing.
Yeah.
The sun's shining or the sun isn't shining. But you know, if you look at once you get out of the present moment, fear is all about the future and anger is always about the past.
Mm.
But if you live in the present moment, you can live outside of anger and outside of fear.
Mm. So true. And what is left is connection with your soul, and that is where
in the present moment, then you can connect. Like, right, my mind is open and my mind is clear. There's no dirty washing in there. You know, there's no dust. There's no particles. They're just clear connection to my soul.
Yeah.
No fears.
And I can sense it, because every time when I've spoken to you, I've always seen you enjoy and laughing and having the childlike energies. And I know that now I know how to actually tap into that, because the moment you have learned the art of being in the present moment and have the attitude of gratitude, you can tap into the joy and the emotion of love and peace and harmony and compassion always. Thank you.
Good. Well, lovely to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Richard. And, when you spoke about gratitude, it reminded me of one of my favorite quotes that I wrote some 15 years back. And it goes like this. Let me just dedicate it to you. I say to everyone I meet that I contain a part of you in myself, and even you contain a part of me in yourself. Thank you so much for your contribution to my life.
Namaste.
Namaste. And I think the last 45 minutes was exceptionally fulfilling for me. Not only to me, to my physical body, but I think it was very fulfilling to my soul. So thank you so much for giving me those moments where I could actually experience myself being in the moment, experiencing what it means to be in the moment, the present moment, the joy, the love, and compassion. Thank you so much.